good.
What a blessing that is, just for you to get to do that,
We're on Numbers 5, chapter 5, separating from sin. So we're pretty much done with the census part, where this Numbers, the name of the book, came from. But there'll be some more off and on. But now we're going to go through some additional rules, laws, guidance that is given in the rest of the Numbers, okay, that God gave to Moses. Verse 1 and 2. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, every one that hath an issue, and whosoever is defiled by the dead. Now, a couple of these things, all these things, is more health related. Okay, like we talked about putting the lepers out back in Leviticus. It was contagious, and they didn't want to do anything. God put into place some laws like this in order to keep it. It may at first seem harmful or hurtful for those one people, but this is a fallen world, and things happen. And because of that fallen status that we have, even today, we succumb to injuries, we succumb to diseases, all those things that was given, not given, but was part of the fall. Okay? So this is trying to protect the Israelites, protect them from being contagious, carrying this around, all these other things. A lot of times they did not know what was causing it. Even today, we saw with the pandemic, they didn't know if it was touching or sneezing or blowing or, what was causing the COVID. Finally, they kind of come to, a consensus that it was airborne. First thing they said, oh no, it's not airborne, it's touching, wherever somebody's got to touch you, all this stuff. Unless I'm remembering it wrong, but I think that's the way it was. So for this chapter, there's 3 different sections in this chapter, and this is the first part of it. He put these, just like he had told them to put them outside the camp, gather them out from where they were. Now, if you were a leper, or if other things, issues that you had, there were remedies for that, okay? It told us back in Leviticus to go after a while, go to the priest, let the priest evaluate it. If the priest says you need to wait 7 days, then you go outside the camp and you wait 7 days, and then you can come back in the camp if it gets better, if your sore gets better. Remember, leprosy was anything that was a disease of the skin at that time. So, acne, yeah, I know, there's lots of stuff now, Darla looks at me as I come in, what'd you do there? Well, I don't know, a rock hit me, I guess, or something, I was weed eater, and I don't know. But it's any kind of blemish or any kind of thing like that. So they're just trying to be cautious, and even today, when somebody has a disease, they put them in a room and they put on the door, contagious. You can't go in there unless you put on a gown and all this stuff, mask and gloves and all that. Because 1, they don't want you to get it and to pass it around, and 2, if they're healing, they don't want the other patient to get something from you. So all these things, including be defiled by the dead. Now, you got to realize, that in Jewish culture, I'm about to sneeze, so if it comes across, I'm sorry. Just right there. But in Jewish culture, they try to bury the dead as quickly as they can. They did not have, at that particular time, the like we do today, embalmed them. The Egyptians did, but the Israelites did. They would get them, wrap them up, put the perfume on them to kind of keep them from stinking so bad that they couldn't, stand it, and then get them in the ground, so to say. A lot of times they buried them in the caves that they made, just like they did with Jesus and many of the others. Some of them they may have buried, in the ground, put rocks over them so the animals couldn't get to them. But that decaying body would have diseases. Or if somebody died of one of these diseases that it talked about, they could be contagious too. So they are trying to don't touch a dead body unless there is a exemption in there. If you go back and look, a close relative. If you go back and look in Leviticus, it tells us if it's a close relative, because somebody's got to bury it, okay? Somebody's going to be defiled for the period of time that they have to be defiled, and they go after the sacrifice, and then they come back and they're clean. So this is one way to keep the contagious ideas. Clark, the commentator Clark, said probably this ordinance gave the first idea of a hospital. Okay, put all these people in a place where they can be treated. So it says, everyone that has a discharge, everyone who becomes defiled by a corpse, all these things are part of what that they wanted to put outside. And this is a protection for the families that were there. And families, it's not only like your brother, sister, father, mother, all that. It's the tribes, the individual tribes. Because once they said, set the tribes up and set them by families, that's what they did. The oldest of the family would be a group, and everybody that was under him. On the second page it says, put out of the camp. It wasn't that any of these things made a person or proved them to be a notorious sinner, though that was often wrongly assumed. Rather, it was that leprosy and all these unclean discharges, dead bodies, were reminders of the effects of sin, which Israel must separate as they prepare to march towards the promised land. So it's to separate themselves out, away from that. At this stage in Israel's progression to the promised land, they had been organized and ordered by God. Now they'd be challenged to become a community that valued purity. God desired to make Israel a promised land people, and that means a purified, holy people. They lived for hundreds of years under the Egyptians. Now he's changing their culture completely from what it was in Egypt to now what he wants it to be. Verse 3 through 4, Brother Everson.
Both male and female shall you put out, without the camp shall you put them, that they defile not their camps, in the midst thereof I dwell. And the children of Israel did so, and put them out without the camp, as the Lord spake unto Moses, so did the children of Israel.
So it's just specifying, it's not just one or the other, it's anybody that has, that fits this description that comes out. Oh, here comes Sister Janet. Have to rewind a little bit. We started just a tad early.
Oh, you did?
Well, our normal people is here, so we just started. We're just on the second part of it.
Where's your faith?
Where's my faith? My faith for 6 months? Yeah. It is good to have you.
It's welcome. You can come up here with us if you want to.
Oh, this is good. Thank you.
All right. Make sure we know we don't mind.
I can scoot over.
Yeah, we don't mind making room for you.
So Numbers 3 and 4, it did not matter whether you're male or female. Okay? The provisions that it had before, those that were lepers, those that had issues of diseases, and those that defiled or were dead, they couldn't defile themselves by going either one of those, they would put them out of the camp and put and it was, like we said, for the benefit of the whole, because they wanted to keep themselves pure and from any diseases that they might encounter. Okay? The great reason for this commanded separation because God lived in the camp. So there had to be an effort to separate from sin and its effects. Remember, it said when they set up the where the temple was, the tabernacle, and then the Levites was around it on all four sides. But yet there was still a distance between the Levites and the tabernacle. There was like, I think it says 1,500 cubits, half a mile almost or more, all the way around it. So it's a DMZ zone. They don't want anybody going in there that's not supposed to be.
That's why they didn't, they wouldn't let me very close.
That's right. And
It's almost like you could walk in front of the White House gate, but don't try to go in.
well, yeah, and even now you go, when we went, you could walk up to the gate. I mean, look in and everything. Now they put, I haven't been up there in a long time.
Spikes.
Well, they put spikes on. I think they closed that road down in front of the White House and put up another gate outside of it. So it's a way to protect something. This is what God had set up for these people to do. And the way he had set the tribes up, okay, it's protecting the tabernacle and protecting Israel. I mean, the Levites in the middle, but it's protecting all of them. Well, then he said, now I'm going to protect you from the inside, not just from the outside. Okay, because there's people going to be coming up against them on the outside, but there are many things that's happened. They came up from Egypt, and some people we know were not Israelites. They were converted through the 10 plagues that they had, and they came with the Egyptians. I mean, it may have been some Egyptians, may have been slaves, maybe whoever it was, saw that God was real and came with the Israelites. They converted over. We don't know how many that was, but we do know that there were some. Because later on, it names some of them that was there.
Makes you want to be there to not go in it, but just look at it,
Mm-hmm.
and it like a sightseeing thing.
Says God's concerned with far more than our individual acts of sin. He demands our sin nature be addressed. Only in Jesus can our sin nature be crucified and the nature of Jesus be given to us, making us new creations. God does not have a relationship of love and fellowship with the old man, but he does with the new man. Same thing, he had fellowship with Adam before the fall. Until after the fall, it had to wait, had to go through priests and everything until Christ came. And now we can have that. It says to be a promised land person means that the effects of sin and the fall are in some way addressed in your life. Promised land people are not sinlessly perfect, but they are not openly, obviously walking in the sin nature, as illustrated by those set outside the camp. How many times new people come in and we expect them to act like mature Christians before they even, they just get saved and they've not been living in a Christian lifestyle, so they don't know what it is. They have to learn. And that's what happened here. So they had been, even the Israelites had been under the Egyptian bondage for hundreds of years. So they had to learn what God wanted them to be. Going to read Iris 5, 6, and 7.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, when a man or woman shall commit any sin that men commit, to do a trespass against the Lord, and that person be guilty. Then they shall confess their sin which they have done, and he shall recompense his trespass with the principal thereof, thereof, and add unto it the fifth part thereof, and give it unto him against whom he hath trespassed.
Okay? So God has, during Leviticus, given the rules. Deuteronomy, he'll give them again. But these are some of the things that said God, it's sin to do these things. Some of the things that people were doing. We saw even when they came out of Egypt, the worshiping of the idols. They had to go through that because to get it out of, I'll say it that way, get it out of their system to show that God was the one ruling. And that they had to give up the old ways that the Egyptians had. They had many gods, many statues, many, all the little trinkets, whatever. So this is probably, says, directed against the person who makes a contract with another person and is unfaithful in the contract. Their sin is not only against the other person, they've also sinned against God. So it's again trying to put an act of purity, an act of truthfulness back into what the people should be. That in the dealings with themselves and the dealings with Israel, within themselves, evidently the Egyptians were not very kind to them. And
remember where it says better not to make a vow than to make a vow and not keep it.
right. So he's just trying to instill upon them this fact that you make a contract or you make a pledge, you need to keep that pledge.
So saying your word is your bond.
Now back in Leviticus, when we was going through that, he had set up the judges, even in Exodus. Jethro, his father-in-law, helped him set up the rulers over tens, rulers over thousands, rulers over hundreds, where he didn't have to judge every single case that came up. So it says the judges of Israel were to make just, righteous judgments regarding the guilt or innocence of the accused. So this system, even though they were put in place, they had an ought with their neighbor, something come up and it wasn't fulfilled, and they take it before the judge of their tribe or their family group. That judge needs to be truthful. He doesn't need to be decide one way or another. He needs to be impartial, in other words. It says the first step in restitution was for the guilty man or woman to admit and agree with their guilt, and to do so before God and the community. I think that's the hardest thing today for people to deal with in becoming Christians, because they've lived their lives the way they wanted to, and to live within boundaries seems like it's not right. That they don't have, I guess, the understanding or they just don't have the learning yet to know that God has their best interests at heart if they'll start following Him. Here it's telling them that they need, when the guilty party confesses, then he needs to not only return what was taken, if it was something bartered for or whatever, and he did it in whatever it was, and they had to give a 20% tax, if you want to say it that way, on top of it. And that goes to help. The 1/5 says the restitution commanded must include a 20% penalty. The thief had to pay back what they took and more. Clark says, for without restitution in every possible case, God will not forgive the iniquity of a man's sin. How can a person in a case of defraud with his neighbor's property in his possession expect to receive mercy from the hand of a just and holy God? It's just like when the parable Jesus told of the wicked ruler. One of his servants come up missing some money. He owed him a lot of money and he couldn't come up with it, and the master let him go. But then he had somebody that owed him a pittance, and he wouldn't let it go. He put him in jail. So it's a matter of what we say is what we need to do too. Then in verse 8, it tells us how to make restitution if the person was dead. You want to read that for us, Bertha?
What page are we on?
Page 4, down at the bottom.
Fast. I think
Huh?
I got ahead of you.
Yeah.
Okay. Numbers 5 and 8.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But if the man have no kinship to recompense the trespass unto, let the trespass be recompensed unto the Lord, even to the priest, besides the ram of the atonement, whereby an atonement shall be made for him.
Okay. There's this one show that we watched that I watch, I guess, me or Darla, one of us, and it had this guy brought out an old box full of stuff, and one of it was a videotape. That tells you today. It was from a company like Blockbuster or whatever, and he had never returned it. How do you return it? Somebody's gone bankrupt. You know, it's kind of hard to do that now. But his friend that he was living with insisted, because he was the one that rented it. He was all out of sorts. He wanted him to turn it back. But there's no way to do that. Here, God gives a way, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes there's something come up and somebody died in the meantime. Well, this is the way it would happen. If there wasn't any family that was related that they could pay the restitution to, pay this money back, then they would give it to the priest. Okay? And in that way, they're giving it to God. It says no relative means the term close relative is gold, the protector or the family rights, sometimes translated kinsman redeemer. And we know that term from Ruth, when Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer for Ruth. The restitution for the wrong must go to the Lord. If a surviving relative couldn't be found to receive it, then the restitution must go to the Lord. The payment was as just important, if not more important, for the guilty one paying it as it was for the victim receiving it. I ran into a situation here not too long ago. I started a subscription service with a plumbing company. They had to come out and do some work for me, and they said, well, you wanna get on our member list? And I said, well, how do you do it? Well, it costs so much a month and all this stuff. And I said, okay, what does it benefit? And they do this, and they do that, several things. I thought, well, that offsets it, the price of a monthly fee. So that's okay. And first month I got charged twice. That's what he told me. I thought, well, maybe it was more than what he thought. Next month I got charged twice. Next month charged twice. So after about the fourth month, I kind of wised up and called him, and I said, okay, I'm paying for this service. He never really gave me anything. He told me what they were going to do, but what will you do? She directed me to a place on their website where it had, because I looked and I couldn't find it. She said, yeah, it's kind of hidden. And I said, by the way, how much does that cost a month? And she said, X amount. And I said, could you look on my account and see? Because I'm getting charged twice, evidently. And she looked, she said, you are. You're paying for 2 subscriptions. And I'm like, okay. So she said, we'll make that right. So a couple weeks later, I got a check in the mail for the second subscription back. That's what I thought. So I got that. Then I got my credit card statement, and I was credited the same amount back. So now I haven't paid anything for 4 months of service.
They got a smart book.
So I called them, and they had to look it up, and they said, I will get back with you. And they called me back and said, you're good. And I said, I'm tired. I'm not trying anymore. I'll take it. You know, I'm sorry, God, I give up. They can't seem to get their books right. I can't help.
That, you run into that everywhere now.
You do, you do.
It's just, you just can't believe it.
Well, I gave a kid no, I gave him $10 and he gave me back like $20 in change. And I'm like, I gave you a 10. And he goes, really? I said, yeah, okay. Made the change. He had to go get a manager, of course, to do it. He couldn't do it himself. So, yeah, it's one of those things. Sometimes it's just like, I tried, Lord, okay, that's.
I did that one time, the kid gave me too much money back, and I tried to tell him, and first he thought I was getting smart with him.
Yeah.
You know, usually people don't, you know, if you get too much, and I said, no, you give me too much money.
Yeah.
And the kid started crying. He said, "Oh man," I said, please take it. Take it. I'll take care of it. I don't know what he was worried about, if he's going to lose his job.
Yeah.
But nowadays, like you said, if you mention it, first of all, the first thing they do, they get defensive because they think that you're, and most of the time it is.
It is, yeah. Charge them too much or whatever, so. But in this case, it says that we need to try. Or the Israelites did. They needed to try. Okay, so. And in this part of it, okay, go back to Leviticus again, and it says, in addition to the ram of the atonement, a ram was part of the guilt offering described back in Leviticus. So this, again, was included. If this happened, you needed to pay the money back, you needed to, fulfill the contract, whatever the contract was, give them a 20% bonus, and then you had to go give a ram, go sacrifice. So it's again encouraging them to do right instead of doing wrong. And I'm not saying that like the things today, it's just like you just shake your head. The kids look at the cash register and they have to give you that amount of money back. And if they punched it in wrong, because I think that's what it did. He punched in $30 and he gave me $20 change, and I only gave him like 10 or something like that. And so the manager looked at it, and I looked at the receipt afterwards, and that's what he'd done. He punched in more than what I'd given him. Like, why would I give you $30? Anyway. So Janet, you want to read 9 and 10 for us?
And every offering of all the holy things of the children of Israel, which they bring into the priest, shall be his. And every man's hallowed things shall be his. Whatsoever any man giveth the priest, it shall be his.
Okay. There were certain things that the priests, their work was in moving the tabernacle and taking care of the tabernacle and doing the sacrifice of it, the priests and the Levites. And for doing that, we read back there in Leviticus, I know keep referring back to it, but that's what we studied 6 months ago or something. And it was going over that where we had to listen to see what had to be done. In this particular case, like on the sacrifice, the hide was given to the priest. And the priest could take the hide, they could use it for the tabernacle if it was part of the ram's hide that they used, or whatever, to replace something, or they could sell it, or they could trade, barter, whatever they want. The priest got some of the meat, they put in the flesh hook, pull it out, that's what they'd eat. The priest got the showbread. After the week was done, they got part of the grain offering, they got part of the drink offering, all these different things. So this is setting up something for that, and here again it says his, but it's given to the priests, and the priests have to kind of divvy it up. Okay, take care of it. And it may be the priest that oversaw the sacrifice of this. That may be how they did it. We don't know exactly what it meant, that person. But kind of for the job he did, that's his reward. He got part of this offering of the one that they couldn't find anybody else willing to do. So that's kind of the second part of this chapter, what they were talking about. It says, every man's holy thing shall be his. The command reminds us of the absolute right the one who brought the offering had to share it in such offerings. This was a way to preserve the opportunity for everyone in Israel to have a holy fellowship meal before the Lord. The priest couldn't take the portion to himself, and a king couldn't tax it away. In the middle of the chapter on the separation from sin, God therefore reminded Israel of the purpose for this separation. It was fellowship with God. This is ultimately is the reason behind that we should pursue purity. That's what Christ said in Matthew 5 and 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That's what God is calling the Israelite people now to do, coming out of Egypt, after coming out of several hundred years of doing things the Egyptian ways. Now, suspicion of sin, the law of jealousy, 11 to 14. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any man's wife go aside and commit a trespass against him, and a man lie with her carnally, and it be hid from the eyes of her husband, and be kept close, and she be defiled, and there be no witnesses against her, neither she be taken with the man, and the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be defiled, or if the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be not defiled. So this is another rule that's set in place for jealousy. Okay? They were now in their tribes, in their groups, family groups set side by side by side. And here Moses is telling them, if this spirit of jealousy comes upon him, so sometimes jealousy in a marriage is revealed to be justified. Other times it's found to be false. Either way, God gave Israel a way to deal with this spirit of jealousy. Goes through, it says sometimes a husband or wife, okay, it can go either way, knows by intuition that their spouse has been unfaithful through interpreting dozens of subtle indications. Yet this intuition is not infallible, and sometimes it's wrong. Accusations of infidelity that can't be proven should be rightly resolved, and God gave Israel this unusual procedure to resolve such matters. Okay? A lot of times, as we read before, and it's like in Jesus' day when they brought the woman before him that had been captured, caught in the act of adultery. This particular case, the woman, talking about a woman, was not caught. There's no witnesses. The husband can't prove anything. But he is getting upset about it. He thinks this is what happened. So because of this, he brings her before the judges, the priests. The ceremony here only dealt with an adulterous wife and not a husband, because for the most part, the law of Moses was case law. It was not meant to anticipate every potential situation, but to give examples that set precedents for other cases, though not stated. It is likely that a similar ceremony would be practiced if a wife became suspicious of a husband's adultery. Okay, so he's saying, the commentator's saying, it could go either way. This particular one was just set forth with the man being the one doing the guilty part, or thinking being jealous. Commentator Allen relates a different type of testing to determine if the accused woman has committed adultery among the Babylonians. Okay, this is not in the Bible, but it's found in the Code of Hammurabi. The presumed unfaithful woman was to undergo the ordeal of trial by death by flinging herself into the sacred river Euphrates. If she were guilty, it was presumed she would drown. If innocent, she would survive and would be able to return to her husband. Now that's a little little far-fetched. Okay? That's different. That's Babylonians. Okay? So it's not the Israelites. They're just throwing that in. Okay, verse 15, Brother Epperson.
Then shall a man bring his wife unto the priest, and he shall bring her offering for her, the 10th part of a ephah or barley meal, and he shall pour no oil upon it, nor frankincense thereon, for it is an offering of jealousy, an offering of memorial, bringing iniquity to remembrance.
Okay. So if the man wanted to bring this before, the priest, he had to bring an offering also. Now it's different than what we read back in Leviticus for bringing the barley offering, the meal, the grain offering, the meal offering. It couldn't have any oil in it, couldn't have any frankincense, no good smelling stuff. It was just for this, and it was for this purpose only. It says this meant that the husband did not have the right to do as he pleased with his wife. He had to bring his wife to the priest and have the matter resolved by a higher authority. It was a serious, solemn thing to bring before the priest, discouraging, groundless, or frivolous accusations. So,
You mean he couldn't throw her in the river?
Couldn't throw her in the river, see if she'd float. It's one of the things, and I think that proves a very valid point. That's what the other people did. That's what the Canaanites, I mean, in this case is Babylonians, but they all had their culture, their different ways. And even the Israelites later on, we see in Jesus' time, if the wife burned his dinner, he could accuse her of give her a bill of divorcement because he burned his dinner or his breakfast. If he didn't please himself. This is kind of where it started from, but that's how far it went. The history and all the other stuff that came with it kind of made it. And Jesus talked to them about that. But anyway, it says there would be no oil or frankincense. These things added to sweeten a grain offering. It says there's nothing sweet about this offering for remembrance. It's for bringing iniquity to remembrance. Okay? This offering was bitter, not sweet, because either a wife would be found guilty of adultery or a husband found guilty of unfounded suspicion. So it could be either way. Now it is wild, okay? The next verses we're going to read. It's a little different. Since it's long, I'll read it, Iris, so you don't have to read all that, okay? Yeah, 16 through 28. And the priest shall bring her near, and set her before the Lord. And the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, and of the dust that is in the floor of the tabernacle. The priest shall take and put it in the water, and the priest shall set the woman before the Lord, and uncover the woman's head, and put the offering of memorial in her hands, which is the jealousy offering. And the priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that causes the curse. And the priest shall charge her by an oath, and say unto the woman, if no man have lain with thee, and if thou hast not gone aside to uncleanness with another instead of thy husband, be thou free from this bitter water that causeth the curse. But if thou hast gone aside to another instead of thy husband, and if thou be defiled, and some man have lain with thee besides thine husband, then the priest shall charge the woman with an oath of cursing. And the priest shall say unto the woman, the Lord make thee a curse and an oath among the people, when the Lord doth make thy thigh to rot and thy belly to swell, and this water that causeth the curse shall go into thy bowels, to make thy belly to swell and thy thigh to rot. And the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. And the priest shall write these curses in a book, and he shall blot them out with the bitter water. And he shall cause the woman to drink the bitter water that causeth the curse. And the water that causeth the curse shall enter into her and become bitter. Then the priest shall take the jealousy offering out of a woman's hand, and shall wave the offering before the Lord, and offer it upon the altar. And the priest shall take a handful of the offering, even the memorial thereof, and burn it upon the altar, and afterward shall cause the woman to drink the water. And when he hath made her to drink the water, then it shall come to pass that if she be defiled, and have done trespass against her husband, that the water that causeth the curse shall enter into her, and become bitter, and her belly shall swell, and her thighs shall rot. And the woman shall be accursed among the people. And if the woman not be defiled, but be clean, then she shall be free, and shall conceive seed. Okay? It's almost as bad as Babylon. Not quite. But it's if you go back and read through this, and I read it in several different versions, okay, the dust that they take is the dirt from the inside the tabernacle. So it's holy, where God was. Okay? It goes through it, and this King James Version, it doesn't say that exactly, I don't think, unless it's in the next chapter, verse. But that's what the commentary was saying, that it's from the floor of the tabernacle itself. Now, whether this dirt made it bitter, or that was just something they put in it, we don't know. Another portion says when they wrote the scripture, the curse out in the book, it says here, blotted out. Well, some of the other commentaries said they would scrape it out. That's like removing it, taking it away. So if it isn't true, that sin is blotted out. That part is gone. Now, one of the commentators, it talks about the idea of uncovering her head, first of all, in verse 18, to unbind, let down her hair. The unbinding of the woman's hair is another hint that she was viewed as unclean. Okay, not that that's the way she was viewed. That was the accusation that was brought forth. So they had to let their hair loose as a mark of uncleanliness. We saw that, we see it when we was watching The Chosen. I don't know if you noticed, but when they was out, the ladies was inside talking to themselves, they wouldn't have them. As soon as a man walked in, they'd put a covering on. They'd put a little, some part on. So that just means if they're uncovered, that they're unclean, representing it. And then he puts the woman to an oath and gives her this oath that I'm not going to read all through it, but this bitter water. Now, some people think that when he goes through this, it scares the living daylight out of the woman, and she confesses, okay? Even before she takes the bitter water, she confesses for it. If she has nothing to lose, then she takes it. I mean, if she hasn't slept with somebody, it's not going to bother her. So we're not really sure what all happens there, but it's in God's purview here. He knows what's happened, and he's taking care of it. And if it actually does, if she gets sick and she can't, she starts getting ill, then she's deemed accursed. Now, what would happen if there was a witness? She'd be dead. Yeah, she'd be dead. There was nothing about that. And here again, we read that last time. It's either or. Doesn't talk about it. It's case law, like they said, which case law is. It means whoever follows these, and that's when it's so if it's a man or a woman. But in Jesus' case, when he was going through that, it was a woman. They didn't bring the man forward, so that's one of the things that should have been done too. But here, that's what it's saying. The effect of the curse is to make your thigh, which is an euphemism for the womb, to rot, and the belly to swell. After the priest said this, the woman had to respond as amen, amen, or amen, so be it. She had to agree that if she was innocent, she deserved vindication. But if guilty, she deserved the punishment. So a verdict of guilty yet excused was never in mind. God, guilty or innocent, adultery was regarded as a sin. The priest shall write these curses in a book and scrape them off into the bitter water. That's what it meant by blot it out. This is from a different version of what that meant. So, in either way, what her sin is put into the water, basically. And if it causes her to get sick, then she will get sick. She's guilty. So the priest puts in her hand the offering too, the grain offering. The priest offers the grain offering as a picture of fellowship and thanks to God, and the accused woman then drank the bitter water. So this was an offering given. If she wasn't, it wouldn't bother her. I mean, it may still be bitter. Some things we take today, it's not really pleasant to take, but it's good castor oil, all that good stuff, the old-fashioned treatments. It says, over time, the judgment of God would be evident. If she came down with some type of internal disease, especially affecting her womb, it would be seen as evidence of her guilt. But if she was free from disease and continued to bear children, it would be seen as a vindication. Notably, if the woman was guilty, her punishment was not in the hand of her husband or even the community. Under the law of jealousy, the punishment of the woman was only in the hand of God. If the woman was innocent, it was known through the entire community. Adam Clark said, some Jewish rabbis also said that if the woman was guilty, the same disease would come upon the man she had committed adultery with. But they also said that even if the wife had been guilty, but her husband had been guilty, but her husband had been guilty of adultery also, the bitter water would have no effect on her. So that's Jewish, some of the rabbis that they said. Here again it says, the ceremony could only work with some kind of supernatural element involved. Drinking water with dust and ink doesn't normally cause diseases. However, the mental stress of knowing your guilt and openly proclaiming the righteousness of judgment upon yourself can't be good for one's health. So that's where sometimes, scaring them straight, that's kind of what it's doing. At the very least, it was a public ceremony, made the entire community aware of what was happening and the seriousness of trying to hide their sin. And again, it was an incentive to be faithful in marriage. You want to read 29 through 31 for us, Iris?
This is the law of jealousy. When a wife goes aside to another instead of her husband and is defiled, or when the spirit of jealousy cometh upon him, and he be jealous over his wife, and shall set the woman before the Lord, and the priest shall execute upon her all this law. Then shall the man be guiltless from iniquity, and this woman shall bear her iniquity.
Okay. Just summarizing the last few verses that we read, that this was what would happen if the woman was guilty. The man was not guilty of jealousy. He had foundation for it. Was proved out.
Well, I'm thankful for grace.
Right.
I mean,
right.
The more and more you study, I know there were all types and shadows of Christ and of purity and of holiness, but I'm so thankful for grace.
Yeah.
I mean, sin is still sin, and it'll send you to hell just like. But what Christ has done for us, man, I think now after all these years of being a pastor, boy, it'd been rough being a priest under the law to keep up with.
Yeah, all that.
I mean, just that one thing right there is, I don't know. I wonder if they took it. Well, if there's an unfaithful wife, you'll take care of this. Okay,
yeah,
you do all this.
Well, again, I think they had. We read so many priests and so many Levites, So I'm sure there's more than one that they take, and they may have each one of them have a particular tribe that they had to deal with. I don't know how or it's just we read that they have horses of priests, and those priests that was on duty took care of whatever was there. But that's right. And this was just the beginning. This was never, even though she was held guiltless, it never put away sin, whatever was all this. That's where Christ came in and tried to make it a completion, tried to complete or fulfill the law. That these things was given, and it was given in that text that it should, and I can't say why it was done that way. My guess is that the way they were going through with the Egyptians was so much different than what God wanted them to be. They didn't have the Savior right then, and they couldn't accept it, I guess. I don't know. That was just the beginning of the history of that.
Well, under grace, under the law, you had to be caught.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Of course, there's a severe penalty right there and on the spot if you
Sure.
got caught.
Sure.
And then even if charges were brought. But under grace, Jesus said, if you look upon a woman, lust after you committed adultery already in your heart, you need to repent of that.
Right.
And
So yeah, it's one of those things that they are learning, like I said, to be from the Egyptians, what they learned from the Egyptians for hundreds of years. That's the rule, that's the law. Just think of us. We've been in the United States over 200 years. Before it was British law, which was somewhat like ours, but the king was the rule. He was the ruler. We don't have a king over here. Not yet. But, so it was different from the people coming over, and they had to adjust to it, coming over to the United States and, making their own rules. Same thing with all the other countries that they have. They're all different rules. Each ones that they got, Jesus wanted, or God wanted in His plan, that this is a way that they to learn how to serve Him, how to be faithful.
Well, you talk about 400 years. Look, I'm 77, and I look and I think how things have changed in just my 77 years.
Yeah.
And how, man, just going back in Christianity 70 years, the difference now, than, the changes.
It's kind of as I've been doing genealogy, because you go back and look at, try to find out more information about ancestors and things like that. I find myself looking at that, the time that changed and how it was and how it is then. I can talk to some of my uncles and aunts that knew my great-grandparents. I never knew them. They both passed before I knew them. I did know one of my great-grandpas. I visited with him when I was a kid, 6 years old, 7 years old. But he lived a long life on my dad's side. So it's actually his mother's dad. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
At this point in the Israel's history,
Right.
Back in Genesis, where a whole lot of the men had more than one wife.
Right.
So are we to assume that men no longer had more than one wife, or what do we know about this?
We don't know a lot about that yet. We see later on in Israel's history, they began taking additional wives. David had more than one wife. Solomon had many wives.
Yes.
Before that, we don't know a whole lot about it. We read some cases in this time period where they married, Jacob had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. So at that particular time, I don't think anything was really said that they had it, but you always go back to the very beginning where God set about and joined a man and a woman, only man and woman there. And that's what it was said. And what Jesus said then later on, it confirms that.
Well, even Moses, when he's beginning to write, in the beginning, I mean, they talked about, Jesus said it's always been.
Sure, it's always been, that's the way it's set forth. Some people ignore it. A lot of people, you know, as far as we know, Moses only had one wife. It wasn't an Israelite. She was of the tribe. Yeah, some of the Midianites, one of them, something like that. So we don't know really. Some of them probably had more than one wife, but like I said, that during this time period, we don't see that being emphasized in the Ten Commandments.
But you also find David and Solomon both had all kinds of trouble.
Oh yeah.
And most of it, a lot of it goes back to having all these different wives, and I mean more than one. I mean, because you know, like you said, in the beginning, God said male, female. You know, one, and
well, David, you kind of, I don't want to stand up for him, but a little bit you can stand up for him, because when Saul gave Michael or Michelle, whatever, however you want to pronounce it, his daughter for David to be his wife, they were married, okay? But then David hadn't become king, and Saul got mad at him, and David took off because he was afraid he was going to get killed, and he gave her to a different husband. He did, Saul did. David had nothing to do with that. So when he came back, when he finally became king, Michael was still around there. And I think he came back, you know, she came back to him. She never had kids with him because she was barren, evidently, Saul's daughter. But David put it upon himself when he went into more than had Abiathar, Abigail, I think it was one of his wives, and then of course Bathsheba. Yeah. So.
you know, it talks about concubines. They didn't have sex with those, but those were ladies that, if he wanted another wife, he had to go to those those that have already, you know, passed the test.
Well, it became probably about Solomon's time. It became to be like the other people did. You would marry one of the other groups, a Canaanite of some sort, Hittite, Amorite, Egyptian, whatever, to form a bondage between their nations. So they would be a marriage, arranged type marriage. But as it said, Solomon got encumbered by his wives, and he sinned because of that.
Israel became weaker because they began to intermarry
Right.
with those same.
Right.
You know,
Other groups.
God had, like he said, he wept in ignorance once. Okay, but all along, his principles always been the same.
Always the same.
And like we made mention here, I mean, even here, God had a plan. If you did mess up, you know.
I can see, like Abraham and Sarah. He was barren, didn't have any offspring. He was going to have his servant be his offspring, you know, turn everything over to his servant. And then Sarah said, no, don't do that, and come up with her plan. It wasn't God's plan. So I can see that if somebody was barren, it's a lot of pressure on the Jewish Israelite to have, especially for a king, and you don't have any kids.
And you got all these, they knew all these prophecies.
Yeah.
They knew that they were going to be blessed, and sometimes it's hard to wait on the Lord.
Yep.
We think.
I'm not saying it's right.
No.
I'm just saying
No.
that
Right.
they get ahead of the boat.
Yeah.
They try to do it their way. So.
Thank you for grace.
That's right.
Jesus Christ.
All right. Appreciate everybody coming out.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.